Hey, we're live. Okay, this is an exciting episode.
It certainly is. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Improve Your Carbon Footprint, and where we talk about climate change, we talk about what's happening, we talk about the threats of climate change, and we talk about what we can do about it. Today we have a very, very exciting episode because we're talking about the possibilities of planting trees with Eden Reforestation. So let me do the introductions. My name is Charles Appleby. I'm the founder of No CO2. That's n0co2.org. We plant trees. We help people to go carbon neutral. Plant enough trees and you too can go carbon neutral. On the line from California, just flown in from Africa, we have Steve Fitch. Now, Steve is the founder and CEO of Eden Reforestation. We're so pleased, Steve, to have you on the line because Eden have planted 265 million trees. And then we have Gary, who's chairing the discussion today. So, Gary, over to you to kick us off.
Well, I'm very excited because this is really our future. What we're going to talk about, 3 key points today. There's a climate emergency. What can we do about that? What is the possibility of planting trees? And it's huge. And I don't think people realize the implications there. And how to remove our CO2 footprint by planting trees. That's the whole thing is based around that. And we're very lucky to have you on the line, Steve.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to join.
Well, you planted a fair few trees in your time.
A few here and there. Personally, I've only planted, I think, 27, but the team has planted more like 265 million and another 5 million or so every month. So that's a lot of trees.
It makes sense to ask, how did you get involved with planting trees? That's a good place to start.
Well, it was a serendipitous experience. I was working in Ethiopia doing more of the traditional development work. We built a hospital, built a number of schools and an HIV daycare center, and I became friends with President Haile Mariam of the Southern Peoples Region. And one day he surprised me by asking me to take over a forest restoration project on the other side of Lake Hawassa that had shown very poor results. After a lot of money and a decent amount of time, they didn't have any surviving trees. And I wasn't keen to take on the project because, frankly, that wasn't my expertise. But he pushed back and he said, basically, our nation is going to be destroyed if we don't restore the forest. And I found myself bouncing along another bad road in Africa and examining the opportunity. Bottom line is I was deeply compelled that this was an urgent need, that the people had suffered greatly as a result of the destruction of their historic environment, and I agreed to take it on. So that's how Eden started, through an invitation from a politician.
Incredible.
And it worked. Yeah.
Do you know, I always like to hear people's feelings. How did that make you feel, taking that kind of project on? Were you anxious? How did it feel? How did your feelings change throughout the process?
Well, I think the feelings would be described, first of all, deep concern for the people, but I certainly didn't want to be the newest guy to screw this up. And fear, maybe, worry, can I actually do this? But I was in a doctoral program at the time, and I asked my advisors if I could switch the focus of my dissertation to something really pragmatic and simple. What works and what doesn't work? And the bottom line is what doesn't work is ignoring the socioeconomic needs of the immediate population. They're desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. And I think anyone listening today would say, if I'm hungry and my children are starving, and if I cut down that tree and I turn it into charcoal, I'll have another day's worth of income to feed my family. You would do it. It's the immediate and the urgent need of the local population just trying to survive. Sadly, they're trying to survive by destroying their environment, which ultimately leads them to a downward cycle that their farms fail, their fisheries fail. So switching the emphasis to a significant degree to care for the local population, to provide them with an income was the starting point. And with that new model, and we've come up with this ridiculous phrase, employ to plant. It's not very sophisticated.
I love it. No, I know, employ to plant. Because sometimes the simple things work. And that's the most classic example of give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach the man to fish, he feeds for life. You've looked at the problem and found a solution. And I think that it's good for the soul.
It is. And, well, since then, of course, watching the projects across the globe succeed with this same simple provide the poorest of the poor with a job. And their job is to grow, to plant, and to guard their forest. And that's the big key, is they fall in love with their forest because they planted it. It's theirs, and nobody's going to cut their forest down again. So their socioeconomic scenario is dramatically altered to the positive. And then within fairly short order, they begin to see all the benefits of a healthy environment again. And it's transformational in so many levels. And so now I'm not afraid anymore. I am thrilled every day. I wake up excited to do another million or so this week.
Wow. So, Steve, the question I've got for you is that probably the most common question that I get asked here about what we're doing with you, with planting trees, people ask the question, well, where are you planting the trees? And people don't really have anything in mind. Now, obviously, a major feature of your website is you planting trees in Madagascar and you're planting trees in Indonesia. So do you just want to switch to the current time and basically tell us a little about why it is that you're planting trees in Madagascar and Indonesia? What's so important about these places, please?
Well, we also plant in Nepal, and we're opening Belize, we're opening Kenya, we're planting in Mozambique, we planted in Ethiopia, and we also are working in Haiti. But the reason why we chose specifically Madagascar is the opportunity, the same with Indonesia, the opportunity. We've become a bit of a mangrove specialist. We do other systems, tropical systems, dry deciduous forest, etc. But mangroves actually, when you restore a mangrove estuary, a forest, you end up with a compounding positive effect that is rather thrilling. And part of the dynamics is, even from a carbon standpoint, mangroves absorb anywhere from 4 to 5 times more carbon when compared to just a normal tropical forest or a dry deciduous forest. It's amazing what mangroves do to absorb carbon, to the health of the ocean. There's no downside to planting mangroves.
Wow. So, Steve, we'll just come back to that point in a minute. What I'm just going to say is that if people are joining the broadcast now, I just want to let you know that this is Improve Your Carbon Footprint. We're talking to Steve Fitch, who's the founder and CEO of Eden Reforestation, and he's telling us about the wonderful work that they're doing all over the world to plant trees. Now, if you're interested in planting trees, then you can take a look at our website, which is n0co2.org. And what you'll find there is the ability to donate to plant trees. And Steve is just saying how fantastic mangroves are in terms of absorbing carbon. So Steve, back over to you, please, to carry on.
Well, mangroves. A lot of people don't know what mangroves are. Some people think mangoes. They're not mangoes. They're mangroves. They are unique forest systems that grow in the tropical coastlands of the world. Indonesia is by far the largest mangrove nation on the planet, something like, I think it's 27% of the world's mangroves historically were found there. They have crazy root systems that allow them to grow in tidal zones. And they have to survive the exchange of the tides twice a day. So they have these wonderful root systems that sink down into the estuary mud, and that's where most of the carbon is actually sequestered. It's called soil sequestration.
How big are their leaves? What do their leaves look like?
What do their leaves look like? Well, their leaves are unique as well in that they secrete salt. There's a lot of mangrove species, so their leaves can vary from, they vary significantly, but they have to get rid of salt because they live in salt water, and they're salty. They're beautiful trees, and they provide habitat at the root systems for baby fish and crabs and shrimp and all kinds of coral reef system species have the origin of their reproductive cycle in mangroves. So if you destroy an area's mangrove systems, you actually, over time, destroy the coral reefs as well. And the coral reefs are dependent upon the mangroves to capture all of that sediment. Otherwise, the runoff from the land will smother the reef in debris, and it's a negative cycle that can be reversed if you restore the mangrove systems, which is very doable.
I love the idea of you paying for local people to plant trees and they love the environment. Are we is it a fair living? Because one of the big things that is a big discussion point for us, certainly on this show, is what could you do as a person living in the suburbs in one of the big cities to make a difference by donating money to no CO2 to Eden. We are in fact paying for people to feed their families so they don't have to burn these trees. That's the simplistic route. But will you tell us some of the families? Is there enough for people to live on? How many people do you employ? Sounds fascinating.
Well, employ to plant is the simple approach, and the income that the villagers earn is absolutely transformational. First of all, 98% of the Eden employees are, we call them full season or year-round employees. Mm-hmm. They work all year, but they usually only need to work 12 to 15 hours a week, which means they're allowed to continue to be subsistence farmers, subsistence fishers, and that way they have their traditional income along with a very fair wage, a transformational wage in their culture. You make $120 a month or so, and that may seem like a small amount to an American or a Brit. That is a massive amount of money for them because these are people who, for the most part, never had a cash-paying job in their entire lives.
Wow,
and
that's
again,
amazing.
It freaks people out to think that $120 a month can transform your life, but in their culture, it does. They're able to feed their families, to clothe their families, to actually, most of them, for the first time in their lives, are able to afford to send their children to school. So
there's a lot of cynicism. when I speak to people, Charles has converted me now. I speak to everyone about planting trees. They say to me, "But how can you prove that this is going to happen?" So, if you were to answer that to somebody living in London or Singapore or New York, and they're a hardened city folk, how do we answer that? Do you have a camera pointing at Google Live? How do we do it?
Google Live. There's no internet in Mahabana, Madagascar.
Okay.
But we do have monitoring and verification systems in place that are, well, they're reliable. Here's the bottom line: you plant the trees, you take a photo with a GPS embedded data in the photo, and actually on the photo there's an app that we use called Theodolite, and it shows the time, the date, and the GPS location, and you see nothing but bare, naked, destroyed environment. And then you come back 3 months later, after the planting has occurred, you take another photo from the same location, and it has the same GPS embedded plus a new date, and you can see that there are now 1,000 trees growing within the confines of that photo. And we also have drone imagery that we're beginning to utilize. But all of these systems come together, and they satisfy the overwhelming percentage of the population. I don't know that you'll ever satisfy.
That's good enough for me. That's good enough for me.
Steve, I never needed all these things from you. You know, I was very happy from the discussions we've had with your team and yourself. I didn't need any more, but there are people who want this sort of level of information, and simplistically, I think we just basically need to offer this to people, but for a higher price, because it takes more time and effort to put this together. So if people want to have this, then I think we should be thinking about offering it. But anyway, Gary, over to you.
Well,
What's next?
This mind-blowing number: 265 million trees to date. You deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for that. A Nobel Prize. How many trees do you aim to plant next year? What's your goal? Where do you see this thing happening? Because we need an awful lot of trees. China had agreed to plant some trees. I think just you told me that. Yeah,
the coming out of the UN meeting, you probably saw this, Steve. But I think in terms of trees, this is the UN meeting on the 23rd of September in New York. Not a lot seems to be said about trees, but Pakistan did step up and agree to plant 10 billion trees. And the simple calculation we did on this show last week is to say, well, look, simplistically, if there's 200 countries and each one plants 10 billion trees, then we've got 2 trillion trees, so we're doing pretty well, yeah? But anyway, Steve, tell us about your plans for next year.
Well, our goal for next year is very achievable. We want to plant a minimum of 100 million trees next year.
Okay.
And we could have done that this year if we'd had funding, but funding limited our production to probably more like 60 million this year.
Okay.
So the opportunity to plant hundreds of millions, even billions of trees is absolutely achievable. There's no lack of space to plant the trees because there's just, well, I think you know this, more than 50% of the forest in the world have been cut down in about the last 100 years. And
Madagascar, the 90% deforestation.
Yeah, this is what you've said, Steve. Madagascar is 90% deforested, is that right?
That's correct.
What's going in its place? I don't understand. It's just empty land. It's just...
Yeah, I mean, Madagascar is a country
Most of the time, it's empty land. And, you know, people say, well, what about the population explosion? Well, actually, what's been happening in the world, all over the world, is as the environment has been destroyed, people are leaving the rural areas. They're moving away and moving to the cities that are already horribly overcrowded and impoverished, and vacating their historic tribal village lands. So no shortage of space. That's the least of the worries.
Wow.
If we had more Steve Finches in the world, this would be so. I can say that, you can't. So let's just say you are watching this and you have aspirations to go to a country and think, right, I'm going to help Charles Appleby, I'm going to help Steve Finch. What are the process of doing this? Because there are humanitarians out there, people capable of project management that want to give up their time. How do we create more Charles Applebys and Steve Finches in this world?
Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe we're better off with fewer of those. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think you're going to save the planet. It's just sometimes that people get paid redundancy. They think, what am I going to do with my life? It lacks purpose. What more purposeful thing could you do than the job that you two are doing?
Yeah.
I so admire you both. Let's just say you've been given a lump sum of money. You need some purpose in your life. Right, where do you go? What do you do? Do you contact you both? What are the process for that?
Well, certainly, Steve, there is a feeling in London, in particular, of a lack of purpose at the moment, and you know, I mean, what I want to do with promoting planting trees with yourselves, what I want people to do is fundamentally, I want people to donate, plant some trees. I also want people to join in, and as Gary has said, let's raise the aspirations here. Let's raise the aspirations of people planting a million trees. But Steve, let's bring you back to Madagascar. I mean, it's not a place that people know much about. I mean, it's not on the tourist destination. It's got a reputation for a place where there's a lot of very special animals and plants which are not in other places. You're telling us there's lots of space. I mean, give us an idea of the trillion trees that we need worldwide. I mean, how many could be planted in Madagascar without, you know, getting in the way of people with other aspirations? I mean, what's the sort of capacity of this place? Because it is a very big place, isn't it, Madagascar?
It is. You know, if you're familiar with U.S. geography, Madagascar is a massive island. It's about the size of California and Oregon combined.
Wow.
So I would say, maybe 4 or 5 UKs. And again, 80% of it is now deforested. Most of that land is vacated. And you could plant literally hundreds of billions of trees in Madagascar.
Wow.
Alone. The mangrove systems along the coastal zones of Madagascar could be in the 20 to 25 billion range.
So
Indonesia, easily more like 100 billion.
So let's just say to people, if you're joining the broadcast now, this is Improve Your Carbon Footprint. We're talking with Steve Fitch, the CEO and founder of Eden Reforestation. And Steve is just putting on the table some amazing numbers of potential for Madagascar. Steve's already planting in Madagascar. He's planted 224 million trees, I think it is, in Madagascar. And basically we're talking about the potential for planting hundreds of billions of trees in this place. So if anybody out there is interested in doing something, wants to volunteer, join in, a really nice way of big funding of stuff is match funding. So if people would like to put up a big amount of money for match funding, then that can help drive other people to fund things. We're talking about billions of trees, we're talking about billions of mangroves. That's the potential for Madagascar. So do call in if you can. The website is on the board here behind us. So Gary, over to you.
Well,
What's
we're a live show, and Caroline has she's quite an amazing individual.
Okay.
She has a sensory garden here in London, and she said that if we were to recycle more, we wouldn't need to cut down trees. That's just a drop in the ocean, I guess. We can do that, but I think we need the trillion trees.
People like to talk about different things that can be done. And at the moment, I mean, let's be clear, we have a climate and environmental emergency. So it's an emergency, so the government should be doing more, and basically a lot of people feel that they want to join in and do something. Now, if people feel inspired to do what they want to do, if people are inspired to recycle stuff, if they're inspired to do whatever they want to do, then please do it, because it's an emergency. But what we're talking about here is a very, very special potential. The potential of planting trees is being recognized by experts across the world. Very much in favor of doing this. There's a lot of space for planting trees, and by planting trees, the point is that that tree, where it's planted in an area where it's been deforested, that tree will remove CO2 for every year that the tree is growing, and we're talking about 20-30 years plus of removing CO2. So that's the point about it, and we can plant a lot of trees into this space, and the trees have the potential to remove 8% of global CO2 emissions, which is a huge number. That's why we want to plant trees. Yeah. So Gary, over to you.
Yeah, well, what do you think it's possible to plant these trillion trees before our Earth warms up? Are we gonna make it?
Yes, we can do it. Go back to employee to plant. There's a billion people on the planet who desperately want to work, who want an income, and a massive amount of these people live in rural communities, historic villages that have been environmentally destroyed. If you go in with good systems that guarantee that they'll be paid, that verification systems that show that you've actually done the work, then you have a ready-made solution. You give the people a job, and they get busy planting trees, and they can plant anywhere from 500, and this is no exaggeration, to 5,000 trees a month once the systems are up and running.
So Steve, give us an idea.
Do the math.
Steve, give us an idea. There's people in the West who want to do something different. They've got high-powered jobs or whatever, and they want to give those up and do something. What sort of skills does someone from the West, what sort of skills and experience do they need to have in order to become a senior leader in planting trees in one of your countries? What sort of people are you looking for? Because we're talking to a lot of people here on this broadcast. What sort of people would be ideal fit for your sort of tree planting operation?
Well, I think it starts off with, are you cross-culturally savvy and sensitive? Because, these people don't speak your language, they don't have your culture. And one of the funny things that happens on a regular basis is, they're a shame-based culture. So if you go in and you ask them a question, do you want to plant trees? They'll almost always say, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily mean their yes is their yes. So you have to learn to understand if they're agreeing that you've asked a question, or they're actually agreeing that they will do the work. And you have to build trust, because impoverished people are frequently taken advantage of to a significant degree. And then you have to develop the systems. In a sense, you have to have some business savvy that allows you to produce large-scale nursery operations. It's relatively easy to plant one tree, maybe even 5 trees. It's harder, much harder, to develop systems that involve planting in one location anywhere from 100,000 to 2 or 3 million trees per year.
See, those leadership skills, you've just taken me, I would love to know more in my imagination, finding the first 10 or 15 people to sign up, so then you've got social proof, having an influencer in the village that will say, yes, let's do this, and then everyone will, that herd mentality. How on earth do you go into a village and say, look, I will pay you to plant a tree? The concept is, unimaginable, I guess, for some people. Like, how do you start with those first 10 people before you get that sign up?
Well, again, it goes back to being, excuse me.
Bless
sneezing.
you.
It starts with sneezing. Forget the sneezing. It starts with being culturally sensitive. I had a weird upbringing. My parents were missionaries, so I grew up in a village setting in the Philippine Islands. So I learned you sit and you listen respectfully. You don't jump right into business. You don't just go in and say, do you want to plant trees? What's important to them is, do you care about them? Do you care about their families? Will you listen to their long explanations of who I am before you will get into what I do? Westerners almost always begin, what's your job? They don't do that in most countries. What they value is who I am. Who are you? And you listen carefully. You sit on the floor of their hut. You sit on the beach in the sand, and you join their community. You hear their heart and their needs. And once you've gotten past that, frequently hours, days of just getting to know them and them getting to know you, then you begin to say, what do you want? Do you want your forest back? What was it like when you were a child? And they will begin to describe a beautiful setting when they were children. The elders are typically who you meet with first. And they will begin to talk about how they miss that. And then you can then go in to say, what if we worked with you and we paid you to do this? And typically they're very skeptical, because what idiot's going to pay me to plant trees? Well, I'm the idiot. But it's real, and it's something that the world needs, and something that we want to do with you. And you hire typically the early adopters, the 10 to 15 people who say, I'll do it. And after about 2, 3, 4 months, the rest of the people are going, hey, they're getting paid to do this, and it's great work, and it's reliable, and they're trustworthy. And then it begins to spin. The wheel begins to spin, and more people want in. And then the surrounding villages hear about it, and they want in. And that's what's been happening to our work in Indonesia, in Madagascar, in Nepal, everywhere we're working now. The word has gotten out that this is the real deal.
What countries can you see this expanding to?
Well, here's the difficult reality. Eden is approached every week by usually 2, 3, or 4 groups that want us to join and work with them. And we could go to virtually any nation on the planet that is both impoverished and deforested and open a project there. There's no shortage of opportunity. We're currently looking at India, Myanmar, Bangladesh. I'd love to go into Tanzania. The list goes on.
So, Steve, what is the limitation then? If you're being being approached every week with opportunities, then what's actually the hold up with you doing more, Steve?
Well, number one, funding.
Yeah.
It costs. It's not overly expensive. Planting trees is the most cost-effective method on the planet to mitigate climate change. But as long as there is a funding limitation, there is a reforestation limitation. The second is, of course, you have to have reliable leaders and reliable systems on the ground. And that's also achievable, because every culture has wonderful, integritous, and smart people ready to go to work.
Okay, so as we said, everybody, this is Improve Your Carbon Footprint, and we're talking to Steve Fitch, CEO and founder of Eden Reforestation. So what Steve said earlier is that he could have planted 100 million trees this year, but he could only plant 60 million because of lack of funding. Now, at the end of the day, that comes down to all of us. We're all contributing in the West, we're all contributing to climate change. It's time we thought about doing something about it. I mean, think about this, right? We see the news every day. You don't need me to tell you. It's in the news every day about what's happening with climate change. So in summary, the risk of rising sea levels, the risk of drought and floods, and we all know what that means. It means crop failures, which means shortage of food in time, and it means instability, massive instability in all countries. So we have a choice, and the choice it really comes down to this. We carry on as we are. We just carry on as we are, live as we are, burning off fuel, heating, flying, all this sort of stuff. Or we give it some thought and say, look, is this really what we want? Because if we carry on, we're going to wreck the planet, we're going to wreck the future of our children, our grandchildren, and we're going to lose all the wild animals as well. Is this really what we want? Or is it actually time that we said, right, I choose to stop climate change? So if you want to commit to stop climate change, then tell everybody about it, share it on social media, and please think about what Steve's been telling us about trees, because he could have planted 100 million trees, he's only planted 60 million. So it's a 40 million tree gap, which the prices of these trees is not very expensive. I think, guys, we need to do more. And I'm tempted to say myself, actually, I really am tempted to say here, look, I'll chip in another 10,000 trees myself, because this is so important. So if anybody would like to join in, do that, match another 10,000 trees, check it on the website and take a look. So, Gary, over to you.
There's people protesting in central London, Charles.
Yeah.
And do you think they're making a difference because it's on the news? The press have been kind; they've given it lots of coverage. But are they making a difference? Like what they tried to do, they with the fire brigade, they sprayed.
Well, let's be clear. It is a climate and environmental emergency. That's where we are. What is not happening, and this is very, very sad, is that the government here, the government in hardly any countries, is really stepping up to what you would expect to be done in an emergency. It's an emergency. We need people to lead the emergency from the government, local government, parish council level. We need this leadership everywhere. It's not happening. So people are saying, in their own way, people are saying, look, I want to do something about it. And that's absolutely what people need to do. People need to do what they feel they need to do. And clearly it should be within the law. What's particularly good about planting trees is that you can do this from your phone, you can do this from your laptop, you can do this from your home. All you need to do is to log in and plant some trees, and it all happens. But because it's an emergency, whatever you feel inspired to do, we need to reduce CO2 emissions, we need to remove CO2, we need to plant trees, we need to talk to the political people, we need to do all sorts of stuff. And if you're inspired to do it, then you do what you're inspired to do.
I have a question for you both.
I'm inspired to plant
I
trees.
can see your passion. I can see both your passion. But I have a question for you both with your hands on your heart. Do you think we'll get to a place where we will have irreversible damage that we will not be able to come back from? Can I ask you both that question? And because there's fanatical everything, and some cynics out there could be listening to this program and think, well, they're just tree hugging, fanatical, they're exaggerating maybe. But the scientists are saying, everyone's saying it. My question, with your hand on your hearts, are we going to get to a point, if we don't reverse things, that will not be able to be reversed? Steve, over to you.
The nature of human beings is to react once it is clearly embedded in their mind that it is an emergency and it's impacting me. And climate change has come to the place where I think the average citizen is realizing it's starting to impact me. So it'll stop being a casual emergency, and it'll turn into a real emergency. And if people can be persuaded that if they plant, say, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 trees through a method like Employ to Plant, then and it'll make a difference, and millions of people will join in that kind of activity, then yes, we can turn this around. We can stop climate change before it's too late.
I hear that. Charles, you want to answer that question?
Well, the thing is, folks, is that what I see is that we're still at the level of talking about climate change. What's happening, it's all the talk, and it's time once we start action, once we start to get into action. I mean, when you look at what people around me are doing, okay, so my wife and I, we've already planted 3,500 trees each. We've switched our electricity supply to green, renewable electricity. We even put in extra insulation in the loft. And, you know, I use a lot of public transport. We're doing all this stuff. So people, you don't have to do all of this stuff. Identify something that you can easily do, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Switching electricity supply is a great one because it's the same stuff comes out the wall. It's just that you may even pay less for it. But it's just that it's coming from green sources instead of from burning fossil fuels. So do whatever you feel you feel inspired to do. But yeah, I think we can get there. And the reason we can get there is because so far we haven't really started on this. If people apply themselves to this, and it comes down to this choice. What's your choice? Do you want to choose to just carry on as we are, burning fossil fuels, wrecking the future of our children and grandchildren, or do you want to do something about it?
So Steve, we're coming towards the end of the show. Would you tell the listeners how they can donate, how they can contribute? If you're this show goes far and wide. If you're listening to this in another country, it doesn't matter how we contact you to help. Can I give you the platform to promote yourself, please?
Well, sure. Thank you. In this day and age, it's the easiest thing in the world. All you have to do is go on the internet and look at the website, edenprojects.org. Scan through and see if you believe we're the real deal. The same thing with your organization. Look at the website, see if it's the real deal, and then make the decision to be a positive influence and plant a couple of thousand, 10,000, whatever. It's just very cost effective, and there's no downside. You'll be helping the poor, you'll be helping the environment, you'll be educating children, because these people have a job now and they can send their kids to school. And the list of positivities goes on and on and on, including obviously the restoration of habitat for endangered species like the lemurs in Madagascar. There's just no downside to this simple approach.
I love what you're hearing, what you're saying, and that approach. Charles, can I ask you the same question?
Sure. So Gary, thanks for that. Just for the listeners, you're listening to Improve Your Carbon Footprint. We're coming to the end now. So basically, what can people do? First and foremost, people can think about reducing their carbon footprint. What they can't reduce, then you can remove your carbon footprint by planting trees. You've got the website here, n0co2.org. Particularly important, talk to your friends. If you're interested in this, doing something about it, share with your friends what you're doing, planning on planting trees, doing something to take action about climate change. And join a local, national or international organization. These people are crying out for people to help. And what's really good is that you massively multiply your own effort by joining an organization, and it helps you through those times when you think, well, it's a bit hard, but you've met some new people maybe locally, and they're really keen to do something, and they help you through it. So do please join in, tell people, share, join an organization. Gary,
it's our next podcast is in 2 weeks. You're creating quite something. You're creating a following, Charles. You're going to be a celebrity soon. What can we look forward to in 2 weeks' time?
Okay, in 2 weeks we've got a friend of mine called Jenny Edwards is going to be joining us. Now, we're going to be talking about the subject of basically what can I do about climate change. So we're focusing very specifically on this. So Jenny took herself to Amsterdam to go to the Shell shareholders meeting to ask the question of Shell about what they were doing. She can tell you the rest of the story in 2 weeks' time. So do please join us in 2 weeks' time. If you'd like to, do please send us your questions in advance. Steve, I'd like to say really thank you so much for your time on the call today. This has been quite amazing. I've learned a lot. I hope our listeners and viewers have learned a lot as well. So, Gary, over to you.
I have to compliment you, give you really recognition for the hard work that you do. You probably, I don't know if you'll accept the recognition as one human being to another. You're quite something. And I think you've got unique skills, but that doesn't mean to say others can't do what you're doing. And you've certainly inspired me today. I think...
Well, thank you.
Anybody that's listening, we are not being paid to do this. Our payment would like to be, even if it's as small as you sharing this message, or you making a comment, or you talking to someone about this, because that's where this starts. It starts with education. Once we're all educated on this, we'll start to care about it more. It really, the wind, you can see the temperature, the rising oceans, it's in front of us. You can see that it's factual. So I wish you both a lovely weekend.
Thanks, Gary.
I'd like to end the show with asking what you're both doing at the weekend. Why not? And say a very good night to you both. What are you doing at the weekend? Anything interesting?
Well, I'm just back from Belize, Mozambique, and Kenya, so
Wow.
I'm going to overcome jet lag and spend time with my family.
Good for you. And what were you doing? You can't just say that and not us find out. What were you doing over there? Were you looking for new adventures, new plots of land? What were you doing?
Well, in Belize, we were meeting with Mayan villagers with the prospect of opening a new project nation there. And in Kenya, we were meeting with several major organizations to dramatically increase the production in Kenya. In Mozambique, it was nailing down our verification systems and opening a few new sites.
Okay, Gary, I'm not going to try and compete with that.
That's incredible.
Steve, that is
Wow.
incredible. So, guys, we need 40 million trees because Steve's short of that. So if anybody can help with 40 million trees, that would be much appreciated. Everyone, have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you for your
joining
attention.
us.
I hope you've enjoyed it.
See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Okay.